What if, in just one heartbeat, your character was erased by someone else's fear? Picture yourself on a plane, tired but hopeful, reaching to help another passenger. Then, without warning, a hand strikes your face, not from an enemy, but from the very person meant to protect you. In that instant, you are no longer seen as a traveler, a father, or a professional. You are branded a threat. Your word is questioned, your dignity tested. And suddenly, the future of your life depends on the voices of strangers around you. If it were you in that seat, what choice would you make? Stay silent to avoid more trouble, fight back and risk proving their prejudice right, or hold on to calm and hope that truth will rise above lies? This is not only the story of a black soldier on Flight 808. It is a story about all of us, about the fragile line between fear and justice, and the power of dignity when everything else is stripped away. Stay with us as we uncover what really happened in row 17. And before we begin, please like, share, and subscribe, because stories like this need to be heard. The crack of the slap echoed through the narrow cabin like a whip. For a split second, everyone on Skyways Flight 808 froze eyes wide, mouths open. The sound didn't belong in this place of order and routine, yet it cut sharper than the turbulence rumbling beneath their feet. A decorated black soldier sat stunned in seat 14C, one cheek reddening, his posture rigid with disbelief. And standing above him, hand trembling from the force of her own action, was Karen Holt, the lead flight attendant. The cabin, once filled with idle chatter, was now a theater of shock, gasps, whispers, and the rustle of passengers reaching for their phones swelled into a wave. People craned their necks, confused, outraged, hungry for explanation. Karen's jaw tightened, her voice harsh. Clipped broke the silence. "Captain, this is Holt. We have a disruptive passenger in row 14. I need immediate security upon landing. Ground the plane if necessary." Her words, cold and final, traveled through the intercom like a verdict. In that moment, the fate of the soldier, the reputation of the airline, and the quiet order of 200 strangers spun into chaos. But this wasn't where the story began. To understand the slap that would ignite a firestorm, you have to know the man who bore it. Marcus Ellison never wanted attention. At 44, he was the kind of leader who carried power without wearing it like armor. CEO of a rising fintech company. Marcus had built his empire from spreadsheets in a one-bedroom apartment on the south side of Detroit. He still preferred strong coffee in a chipped mug to champagne and crystal. He never bragged about the billions in valuation his company had reached. Today, he wasn't traveling for business. He was headed to San Francisco for something far more important, his daughter Alana's 12th birthday. He had promised her he wouldn't miss it this time. The pink balloons were already waiting in their modest townhouse. His wife Mariah had teased him the night before. "No excuses, Marcus. Alana's cake won't cut itself." That promise was tucked carefully in his chest pocket, folded inside the journal he carried everywhere. Its pages were filled with notes to his daughter, encouragement, advice, even doodles from long flights. In row 14, Marcus looked nothing like the billionaire he technically was. A navy blazer, jeans, scuffed leather shoes, a man who blended in, except for the quiet dignity he carried, the way he said thank you to the attendant handing him water, or smiled gently at the nervous teenager fidgeting beside him. On this crisp autumn morning, Newark Liberty International Airport had pulsed with the usual rhythm rolling suitcases, rushed goodbyes, the scent of burnt coffee near gate C-17. Marcus had walked through it all with steady steps, earbuds tucked away, preferring to hear the world raw. Boarding was smooth. though he noticed Karen Holt's tense smile as she greeted passengers. Her uniform was immaculate, hair tightly coiled into a bun, but her eyes darting. Tired, betrayed sleepless nights. Marcus nodded politely as he stepped aboard, unaware that her storm was already brewing. To the other passengers, Marcus was just another man in business class. But in truth, he was also a soldier. Before tech, before boardrooms and IPOs, he had served in the UK Army for nearly a decade. Afghanistan, Iraq, deployments that carved discipline deep into his bones. He had traded fatigues for tailored suits, but the soldier in him had never left. It showed in his posture, the way he observed without intruding, the patience in his silences. Flight 808 took off smoothly, climbing over the eastern seaboard. The seatbelt light blinked off. Trays clinked, overhead bins clicked, and the rhythm of long-haul flight settled in. But beneath the hum of engines, small tensions threaded the cabin. Karen scolded a young man for leaning too far into the aisle. She snapped at her colleague for moving the beverage cart too slowly. Her stress leaked into every exchange. Some passengers muttered. Others just avoided eye contact. Marcus watched quietly. His instincts told him something fragile was unraveling, but he stayed in his lane, journal open on his tray table. He wrote to Alana Babygirl, "When the world feels unfair, breathe before you react. Anger burns quick, but leaves ashes. Strength is staying calm." He didn't know how soon those words would be tested. It started small. A passenger in front of Marcus fumbled a bottle of water, which rolled back and tapped against Marcus's shoe. The man unbuckled to reach for it, ignoring the seatbelt sign as the plane shuddered lightly. Marcus leaned forward, picked it up, and handed it back with a polite smile. At that exact moment, Karen strode down the aisle, nerves frayed from hours of mounting frustrations. She saw movement in Marcus's row, saw him leaning forward as the seatbelt light glared overhead. Her eyes narrowed. In her mind, it wasn't kindness. It was defiance. Her words cracked sharp. "Sir, I told you to stay seated." Marcus looked up, calm but surprised. "I was just handing him his bottle. That's all." Passengers nearby stiffened, sensing the tension. Karen's voice rose. "Don't argue with me. Sit down and keep still." Marcus nodded slowly, retreating into his seat. Years of discipline kept him measured, though inside, confusion simmered. Why escalate this? The turbulence deepened. Lights flickered. Karen, already trembling from her own storms, her mother's illness, debts piling at home. A supervisor's warning ringing in her ears snapped. She mistook Marcus's calm for defiance, his quiet dignity for challenge. And then, in a flash of uncontrolled rage, her palm shot across his face. The sound rang out. Passengers gasped. Phones came up like weapons. Marcus sat frozen. His soldier's discipline chained his instincts, though every muscle in his body screamed to respond. He placed his hands on his knees, steady, his cheek burning. Across the aisle, a child began to cry. Someone whispered, "Did she just—" Another voice rose. "You can't do that." Karen's breathing quickened, realizing what she'd done. Fear clamped down on her chest. But instead of apology, she reached for the intercom, her words sealing the catastrophe. "Captain, disruptive passenger. Request immediate landing." And with that call, the lives of everyone on Flight 808 veered off course, long before he became the man in Seat 14C. Before boardrooms and investors, Marcus Ellison learned to carry himself with quiet strength on the cracked sidewalks of Detroit's East Side. His childhood wasn't the story of overnight miracles or golden opportunities. It was long winters where the heat rattled weakly through old pipes, and summers when he and his brothers slept on the porch just to catch a breeze. His mother, Denise, worked double shifts at the hospital cafeteria, her shoes worn thin but her head held high. His father had disappeared when Marcus was 10, a man too burdened by his own demons to stay. The absence left Marcus with two choices: sink into bitterness or rise with purpose. He chose the latter. Though the climb was brutal, school was his battleground. Teachers often underestimated him, some assuming that boys like Marcus were destined for trouble. He proved them wrong. Notebook always filled, hand always raised. His mother's voice anchored him. "You don't have to be the loudest in the room. Baby, just make sure they can't ignore your work." By the time he reached high school, Marcus had earned a scholarship to a private preparatory program across town. Every morning, he rode 2 buses to sit beside kids who wore polished shoes and spoke casually of ski trips and summer camps. He kept his head down, absorbing not just equations and literature, but the codes of another world. He learned how to move between spaces, to adapt without losing himself. Yet, beneath the polished composure, Marcus carried a fire. He knew the odds stacked against young black men in his neighborhood. He'd seen friends lost to violence, classmates vanish into juvenile detention. He vowed silently that his story would be different. The Army gave him that chance. At 18, Marcus enlisted, trading textbooks for fatigues. Detroit's cracked pavement for the sands of Iraq. Boot camp stripped him bare and rebuilt him, muscle by muscle, command by command. He learned to stand tall under the weight of discipline, to breathe steady when chaos screamed around him. Deployments carved deeper lessons, nights where mortar shells shook the earth, days when he wrote quick letters home in cramped handwriting, promising his mother he was safe even when he wasn't. Marcus wasn't the loudest soldier, but he became the one others trusted: steady, reliable, the calm in the storm. It was in those deserts that Marcus discovered leadership wasn't about rank or shouting orders. It was about presence. When younger soldiers panicked, his quiet tone steadied them. When fear coiled in their throats, his unshaken gaze reminded them they could push through. He never forgot the words of his commanding officer Ellison: "Men don't follow noise, they follow steadiness." When Marcus returned home after nearly a decade of service, Detroit felt smaller, but just as heavy with struggle. Jobs were scarce, opportunities scarcer. He enrolled in community college using the GI Bill, majoring in finance because numbers, unlike people, didn't lie. At night, he coded small projects on an old laptop, teaching himself the emerging language of fintech. He met Mariah, a school teacher with laughter that softened every room. During those long nights of studying at the library, she teased him for his serious face, called him professor even though he was just scraping by. Their love was steady, unflashy, built on mutual respect and shared dreams. Together, they built a life piece by piece, a modest apartment, then a modest house, then, to their surprise, a daughter, Alana, whose first cry rewrote Marcus's definition of success. He vowed that she would never doubt her worth, that she would know a world where her father was always present, always fighting for better. Success came slowly, then all at once. His small projects evolved into a fintech startup designed to help families like his mother's working-class households navigating loans, credit, and bills. Investors laughed at first, but Marcus, with his soldier's patience and his mother's grit, kept refining. When his app went live, it spread quietly among communities overlooked by big banks. Within 5 years, Marcus Ellison was no longer just a man with a dream. He was the CEO of a company valued in the billions. Still, he never quite shed his soldier's mindset. He rose early, ran 2 miles before sunrise, and kept a journal like he was still in the barracks. The world might see a wealthy executive, but Marcus saw himself as a father, a husband, and a servant leader. It was this balance the soldier, the CEO, the father that Marcus carried with him when he boarded Flight 808. He wore success lightly, like a well-fitted coat, but beneath it lay scars that had taught him restraint. On that morning in Newark, while other passengers scrolled through their phones, Marcus sat quietly at the gate, jotting a note for Alana. "I won't always get it right, baby girl, but I promise I'll always come home to you." Those words sat heavy in his pocket as he greeted Karen Holt at the cabin door. He noticed her brittle smile, the tension etched in her jaw. Years of training had taught him to recognize stress in others, the darting eyes, the clipped tone. But he wasn't there to fix strangers. He was just a father trying to get home in time for cake and balloons. He didn't know that his calm presence would be mistaken for defiance, that his patience would be seen as arrogance, or that his dignity would become the match to someone else's unraveling. For the passengers around him, Marcus was simply a polite man in row 14 sipping water, scribbling in his journal. But beneath that exterior lay a lifetime of battles fought, both visible and invisible. He had endured enough storms to know when to hold silence and when to speak. That restraint would be tested in ways he never imagined. Because while turbulence rattled the metal shell of Flight 808, another storm quieter but far more dangerous was brewing inside the heart of a single flight attendant. And Marcus, without warning, would be thrust into the center of it. While Marcus Ellison's life was built on discipline and quiet resilience, Karen Holt's world was stitched together with fragile threads that seemed ready to snap at any moment. To most passengers who stepped aboard Flight 808, she appeared the picture of professionalism uniform pressed, hairpin tight, smile practiced enough to pass as genuine. But behind that thin facade lived a storm of exhaustion, fear, and regret. Karen hadn't always dreamed of being a flight attendant. At 20, she had wanted to teach history, to stand in front of a chalkboard and spark curiosity in young minds. She had enrolled in college with scholarships and big hopes, but when her father died suddenly from a stroke, she abandoned her studies to support her mother. A part-time job at the airport cafeteria became full-time, then shifted into a chance meeting with a recruiter for Skyways Airlines. The promise of travel, decent pay, and medical insurance convinced her to take a leap. At first, she loved it, the thrill of seeing new cities, the camaraderie with crew members, the polite thank yous from grateful passengers. But after nearly 15 years in the air, the job no longer felt glamorous. It was grueling, endless flights, cramped layovers in soulless hotels, aching feet, and a constant demand to smile no matter how hollow she felt inside. The last 2 years had hollowed her even further. Her marriage collapsed after years of strain. Her ex-husband moved across the country, leaving her with credit card debt and a cracked sense of trust. Her mother, the one person she leaned on, had been diagnosed with advanced kidney disease. Karen spent her nights balancing hospital visits, phone calls with doctors, and stacks of unpaid bills. Each shift in the air felt heavier, like dragging chains through the narrow aisles. That morning in Newark, Karen barely made it through security without snapping at a TSA agent. She had slept less than 4 hours. Her mother had called at 3 minutes, confused and crying, and Karen had stayed on the phone until dawn. By the time she pinned her name badge over her heart, her chest already ached from holding too much in. She promised herself she would get through the flight. Just 5 hours from Newark to San Francisco. Smile. Serve. Survive. But even before takeoff, cracks showed. A young man shoved his oversized bag into an overhead bin, nearly crushing another passenger's coat. Karen scolded him curtly, earning a glare. In the galley, her colleague spilled coffee on a stack of napkins, and Karen muttered under her breath. The smallest inconveniences scraped her nerves raw. She told herself it was fatigue, that she would find her balance once they were cruising. Yet, when she greeted Marcus Ellison at the cabin door, something about him unsettled her. He didn't look wealthy, though she later overheard another passenger recognize him as that fintech guy. He wasn't rude, didn't demand anything. In fact, he was unfailingly polite. But his calm demeanor, the way he carried himself without apology, pressed against her fragile state like a mirror she didn't want to see. She mistook his steadiness for judgment, as though he silently measured her and found her lacking. As the flight settled, Karen's colleague on the opposite aisle, a veteran attendant named Rosa Martinez, noticed her sharp tone. Rosa had been in the industry even longer and knew the signs of burnout. She whispered, "Take a breath. Karen, not every little thing needs fire." But Karen brushed her off, unwilling to admit how close she was to breaking. When turbulence rocked the cabin an hour later, Karen's composure cracked further. A baby cried inconsolably in row 12. A businessman demanded another blanket in row 15. The call buttons chimed like alarms. She moved quickly, too quickly, snapping at passengers to sit down, tightening her jaw until her teeth ached. She told herself she was doing her job, keeping order, enforcing safety, but deep inside, another voice hissed, "You're losing control." And then there was Marcus. She saw him lean forward to return a water bottle. To anyone else, it was a simple gesture of kindness, but through the lens of her frayed nerves, it looked like defiance. A passenger standing when the sign was on, a tall man shifting in ways she didn't control. Her chest tightened. She barked at him to sit, her voice sharper than she intended. He responded calmly, respectfully, but his steady tone only amplified her fear that she was losing authority. In her mind, every small act of his became a challenge. His silence, his patience, his very calmness felt like resistance. She didn't see a father trying to get home for his daughter's birthday. She saw a threat to her fragile command of the cabin. As turbulence worsened, Karen's inner storm reached its peak. Her mother's hospital bills, her failed marriage, the supervisor who had warned her just last week. One more complaint. "Karen, and we'll have to reconsider your position." All of it collided with the sight of Marcus sitting there, steady and unshaken, as though her authority meant nothing. The slap was not premeditated. It was a reflex, a flash of pent-up rage released in one reckless motion. The moment her palm met his cheek, the sound cracked louder than any turbulence. And immediately, regret filled her veins like ice water. But Karen's pride, her fear of losing the little she had left, overrode the chance for apology. Instead of admitting her mistake, she reached for the intercom and cast Marcus as the villain. Her voice trembled, but carried finality. "Captain, we have a disruptive passenger." Passengers stared, some in disbelief, some already pulling out their phones. Karen's hand shook as she clutched the handset. She told herself she was preserving order, that the company would back her because they always backed crew. But deep inside, she knew the truth: she had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. While the soldier in 14C sat still, Humiliated, yet composed, Karen stood trembling, trapped between fear and denial. For 15 years, she had served thousands of passengers, endured insults, tears, and turbulence. But it was one impulsive moment, one misread gesture, one slap, that would define her career and her name. As the plane cut westward through rough skies, Karen glanced at Rosa Martinez, who shook her head in quiet horror. Rosa mouthed the words without sound. "What have you done?" Karen looked away, her throat tight, her heart hammering. She had no answer. For the first 2 hours of Flight 88, the cabin felt like a fragile bubble, quiet enough to lull passengers into half-sleep, yet tense enough that every small disruption carried the weight of something larger. Marcus Ellison tried to lose himself in his journal, writing notes for Alana about keeping her courage in middle school and never letting anyone shrink her dreams. But around him, the air carried sharp edges. Karen Holt's clipped instructions, the impatience of tired travelers, the rattling turbulence, it all conspired to fray nerves. The first spark came from row 13. A toddler squirmed free from his mother's arms, tumbling into the aisle just as the seatbelt sign chimed back on. Karen rushed over, voice too loud for the circumstance. "Ma'am, you must restrain your child immediately. This is a safety violation." The young mother flushed, fumbling to hold the boy. Marcus instinctively leaned forward, offering the mother the toy car that had rolled under his seat. The child calmed instantly, gripping it like treasure. The mother whispered a thank you, her eyes relieved, but Karen only saw Marcus moving again while passengers were supposed to be seated. Her words carried frost. "Sir, I've already warned you once. Stay in your seat." Several passengers exchanged glances, sensing tension that had little to do with safety and more with pride. Marcus said nothing, offering only a small nod as he sat back. He had no interest in escalating the situation. Yet the heat in Karen's gaze lingered as she walked away, muttering something Rosa Martinez couldn't quite catch. Rosa, working the opposite aisle, had noticed every exchange. She admired Marcus's patience, the way he handled himself with dignity even when publicly rebuked. And she noticed, too, the way Karen's voice shook with something deeper than professional firmness. Rosa had flown thousands of hours and knew the difference. This wasn't just about a passenger. It was about Karen unraveling. The second spark arrived not long after. A businessman in row 16 jabbed the call button 3 times in quick succession, demanding another blanket. Karen hurried over, her nerves already stretched thin. "Sir, I'll get to you as soon as I can," she said. But the man rolled his eyes, muttering about lazy crew. Marcus heard it, his jaw tightening at the disrespect. He kept his eyes on his journal, resisting the urge to intervene. When Karen returned with the blanket, her hands shook as she shoved it onto the man's lap with more force than necessary. He recoiled, glaring at her. Unprofessional. He muttered loudly. Karen's face flushed, her breathing shallow. Marcus could feel the tension ripple down the aisle. He closed his journal, folded his hands, and reminded himself to stay still. Years of soldiering had taught him when silence was the strongest weapon. The third spark was sharper. A college student rummaged through the beverage cart as Karen served row 12, knocking a can of soda to the floor. Karen's voice cracked like a whip. "Do not touch this cart. Sit down immediately." The boy recoiled, muttering an apology. Marcus bent down, picked up the can, and set it back on the cart. "It's all right," he said gently, handing it over. That small kindness only twisted Karen tighter. In her mind, Marcus's gesture wasn't help. It was interference, a subtle challenge to her authority. She snapped, "I said I'll handle it." Passengers near row 14 fell silent, all eyes flicking between the two. Marcus remained still, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Karen's rising volume. It was Rosa who broke the silence, stepping closer and murmuring to Karen, "Take a breath. You're wound too tight." Karen glared at her colleague but said nothing, retreating to the galley to compose herself. Rosa shook her head, lips pressed tight. She knew they were on the edge of something dangerous. For Marcus, the incident stacked like bricks, none of them serious on their own children fussing, businessmen grumbling, spilled drinks. But together, they painted a picture of a crew member stretched past breaking, and of himself being cast repeatedly as the flashpoint. He wondered if it was because he was a large black man in a cabin where authority had to be visible, or if it was simply that Karen had chosen him as the outlet for her storm. Either way, he knew his best chance was to remain steady. Yet the cabin had become a stage, every passenger a witness. Conversations hushed when Karen passed. Eyes flicked to Marcus as if measuring his patience. He could feel it. The cabin was holding its breath. The turbulence returned heavier, jolting cups and rattling bins. Marcus braced himself, hands gripping the armrests. Across the aisle, a child whimpered. Karen hurried down, barking instructions. "Buckle up. Secure your items." Her voice rose higher with every command. When she reached Marcus's row, she saw his backpack nudging slightly into the aisle, shifted by the shaking plane. "Sir, that bag must be fully under the seat," she snapped. Marcus looked down. The strap barely touched the aisle. He nodded and nudged it back with his foot. "Understood." But Karen's voice sharpened. "It needs to be all the way in. Federal regulations require compliance. This isn't optional." Marcus blinked, surprised at the harsh tone. He had already complied. Yet she lingered, staring at him as though daring him to argue. He chose silence, sliding the bag further in until it disappeared completely. The older woman beside him, Rosa's cousin traveling on a guest ticket, whispered, "That was unnecessary." Marcus offered her a small, reassuring smile. "It's fine," he said quietly, but inside, a knot tightened in his chest. The cabin exhaled when Karen finally moved on. But the air didn't soften. It grew heavier, like the moment before a storm breaks. Passengers began whispering, their phones ready, anticipation sharpening. They didn't know what would happen next, but they sensed it would be something worth remembering. For Marcus, the decision was simple: endure, get home to Alana, and forget this flight as quickly as possible. But fate, like turbulence, had its own plans. The hum of the engines filled the cabin like a steady drumbeat. Yet beneath it, tension simmered. Marcus Ellison adjusted his seatbelt as another ripple of turbulence shook the aircraft. He wasn't a nervous flyer. Years of military transport had taught him how to ride storms. But he noticed the way other passengers gripped their armrests, knuckles pale against leather. A young boy whimpered. His mother stroked his hair, whispering, "It's just bumps, sweetheart." Marcus gave the boy a small nod, his calm presence a silent reassurance. Karen Holt marched briskly down the aisle, her heels clacking louder than necessary. Her instructions were sharp. Remain seated. Keep your belts fastened. The turbulence seemed to give her permission to amplify her authority, to control through volume. Rosa Martinez followed a few paces behind, steadying the beverage cart and offering soft words to passengers. The contrast between the two women was obvious to everyone watching. Another jolt rattled overhead bins. A water bottle slipped from an elderly woman's lap and rolled beneath Marcus's feet. Without hesitation, he bent down, retrieved it, and placed it gently back into her hands. She smiled with gratitude, whispering, "Thank you, young man." But Karen caught only the sight of Marcus leaning forward during turbulence, his body half turned into the aisle. Her pulse surged. In her mind, rules were being defied. She snapped, "Sir, I told you to stay seated. Do not move around when the sign is on." Marcus sat back calmly, voice even. "I was just returning her bottle. That's all." The old woman nodded quickly. He was helping me. But Karen's gaze didn't soften. She turned sharply on her heel, muttering about non-compliance as she stormed toward the galley. Passengers traded uneasy glances. The mother of the toddler from earlier whispered to her husband, "He wasn't doing anything wrong." Phones discreetly angled, recording in case something happened. Everyone felt the crackle of an impending storm. Marcus returned to his journal, steady strokes of his pen grounding him. Stay calm when others lose balance. Breathe first. Speak second. They were words he once wrote for his platoon, now reshaped for his daughter Alana. He felt the weight of them now more than ever. Minutes later, the turbulence worsened. Overhead bins rattled like loose drums and trays quivered. Karen's voice rang out, "Secure all loose items. We are experiencing severe turbulence." She strode down the aisle again, eyes sweeping like a searchlight. As she neared row 14, she spotted Marcus's backpack. The strap had shifted an inch into the aisle, jostled by the shaking floor. To Marcus, it was nothing. His foot was already nudging it back. But Karen's eyes locked on it like proof of her growing conviction. "Sir, your bag is not properly stowed," she barked. Marcus pressed it firmly beneath the seat. "It's in now." But Karen's voice sharpened. "Carrying down the row. That's not sufficient. It must be all the way in. You are required to comply." A murmur rippled through nearby passengers. Rosa, watching from the other aisle, stepped closer. "Karen, it's fine. The bag's secured." Karen ignored her, eyes fixed on Marcus. To her frayed nerves, his steady calm was provocation. She needed him to bend, to show submission, to confirm she hadn't lost control of her cabin. Marcus's voice remained level. "It's under the seat. There's no obstruction now." But his composure only fanned her anger. She leaned closer, her words cutting. "You need to follow instructions without question." "Do you understand?" Marcus held her gaze, not with defiance, but with measured patience. "I understand regulations. I also know I've complied." The silence that followed was thicker than the air at 30,000 feet. Passengers held their breath, sensing the invisible tug-of-war, her authority unraveling, his dignity immovable. Then came the twist of fate. Another sharp jolt of turbulence sent a plastic cup flying from a tray across the aisle. Marcus instinctively reached out, catching it before it splashed onto the lap of a sleeping passenger. A reflex, nothing more. He handed it back quietly, almost sheepishly. But in Karen's eyes, that reflex was the final straw. She saw movement where she demanded stillness. She saw challenge where there was only kindness. Her mind, tangled by fear of failure and desperate need to assert control, twisted the moment into rebellion. Her hand rose before reason could stop it. The slap cracked across Marcus's cheek. Gas erupted like a wave. The sound echoed in the narrow cabin, louder than the engines, sharper than any turbulence. Phones tilted, capturing every second. A child whimpered. Someone muttered, "Oh my God!" Marcus sat frozen, the sting spreading across his face. Years of discipline rooted him in place. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't lift his hands. He simply breathed, the way he had trained himself in deserts halfway across the world. Rosa's voice broke the silence. Karen. Her shock was unmistakable. Her eyes wide with disbelief. But Karen, trembling with the weight of what she had just done, doubled down instead of retreating. She snatched the intercom, her voice shaky but forceful. "Captain, this is Holt. We have a disruptive passenger in row 14. Request immediate diversion. Ground the plane." The cabin exploded in whispers, outrage, disbelief. Passengers pointed, some filming, others shouting that Marcus hadn't done anything wrong. But the words were already spoken. Traveling to the cockpit, sealing the course of Flight 808. Marcus sat still, the echo of the slap ringing in his ears. He thought of Alana's birthday cake, of the promise tucked into his journal. He had endured worse on battlefields, but this cut differently not to his body, but to his dignity. And as the plane veered off its path toward San Francisco, banking instead toward Denver, every soul aboard knew they were caught in the center of a storm that had only just begun. The intercom clicked off, leaving the cabin in stunned silence. For a heartbeat, only the roar of the engines filled the air. But beneath it came whispers, then sharp voices. "She hit him," someone said from 2 rows back. "He didn't do anything." Another added, louder this time. A passenger across the aisle lifted his phone higher, recording every second. The truth had already begun its digital journey far beyond the sealed walls of Flight 808. Marcus Ellison remained seated, hands resting calmly on his thighs, the sting on his cheek fading into a deep, steady ache. He had endured humiliation before, in boardrooms where people mistook his measured voice for weakness, in restaurants where servers skipped his table until he spoke up. But this was different. This was public, undeniable, physical. Yet he stayed still, his discipline a shield stronger than anger. Rosa Martinez hurried toward him, kneeling slightly so passengers could see her face. "Mr. Ellison," she said gently, her Spanish accent coloring the edges of her words. "I saw what happened. Others did too. Please, stay calm." Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed fear not of Marcus, but of the chaos her colleague had unleashed. Karen Holt stood near the galley, trembling but defiant. Her jaw was tight, her eyes darting from passenger to passenger. She knew she had crossed a line, but now her only weapon was control of the narrative. He refused orders. She insisted, louder than necessary, as if volume could turn fiction into fact. He became aggressive. "I acted for safety." The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. Some passengers scoffed. Others muttered in disbelief. The elderly woman whose water bottle Marcus had returned raised her trembling hand. "That's not true," she said firmly. "He was helping me. You hit him." Karen's lips pressed into a hard line. She turned her back to the passengers, whispering into the intercom again. "Captain, situation escalating. Please expedite diversion." In the cockpit, the pilot exchanged a troubled glance with his co-pilot. Airline protocol was strict. If a crew member reported a passenger as disruptive, they had to take it seriously. But something about Holt's voice carried a tremor, not just of authority, but of panic. Still, procedure ruled the skies. The plane banked slightly, veering east toward Denver International Airport. Inside the cabin, the announcement soon followed. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to a security concern, we are diverting to Denver. Please remain seated." Gasps, groans, angry whispers erupted. Passengers with connecting flights cursed under their breath. Parents worried about children waiting at arrivals. But most eyes fixed back on Marcus, the man at the center of a storm he hadn't created. The Marine sitting 2 rows behind Marcus finally stood, ignoring Rose's pleas to sit back down. His voice boomed across the tense cabin. "I served with men like him. He didn't threaten anyone. That slap, everybody saw it. She assaulted him, not the other way around." Applause broke out in scattered pockets, defiance against the injustice they had witnessed. Karen's face flushed crimson. She grabbed for authority again, her words sharp. "Sir, sit down immediately, or you will be restrained." But this time, her voice no longer carried the weight of command. The passengers had seen too much, and the tide of sympathy flowed toward Marcus. Phones remained pointed like watchful eyes, ensuring no lie would erase the truth. Marcus finally spoke, his voice low but steady enough to cut through the noise. "Please, everyone, remain calm. We'll let the authorities sort this out when we land." Even in humiliation, he thought first of others, of preventing the cabin from boiling into chaos. His presence steadied the storm, though the ache in his chest deepened with every passing second. The descent into Denver felt longer than it was. Lights of the city flickered beneath the wings as the plane approached the runway, flashing beacons of an unwanted stage. Marcus sat motionless, watching as Karen hovered near the front, clutching the intercom like a lifeline. Rosa moved quietly through the cabin, reassuring passengers, whispering to those who promised to speak up on Marcus's behalf. When the wheels touched down with a heavy thud, the cabin erupted in relieved applause, half habit, half relief. But the celebration was short-lived. Through the windows, flashing blue and red lights painted the tarmac. Airport police vehicles and airline supervisors waited like judges outside a courtroom. The cabin door opened, and 2 uniformed officers stepped aboard, followed by a man in a dark suit with a Skyline air badge clipped to his chest. His eyes scanned the cabin, sharp and assessing. Karen immediately pointed. "That's him. Row 14. He was disruptive and aggressive." The officer nodded, but didn't move right away. Instead, passengers erupted in unison. No one shouted. "She hit him," another cried. The elderly woman lifted her voice again, trembling but resolute. "You've got it wrong." He was calm the entire time. The Marine held up his phone. "I have video." He didn't touch her. The man in the Skyline badge, visibly unsettled, gestured for the officers to follow him. They approached Marcus, who rose slowly, hands visible, movements deliberate. "Sir," one officer said carefully, "we need you to step off the plane so we can sort this out." Marcus nodded. "I'll cooperate." His voice carried the weight of restraint, of a man who knew resistance would only deepen the injustice. He turned to Rosa. "Thank you." She touched his arm lightly, whispering, "We'll speak up for you." As Marcus walked down the aisle, passengers spoke out, some standing in solidarity. "This isn't right. We'll testify. We saw everything." The swell of voices followed him, a chorus of truth refusing to be silenced. Karen trailed behind, pale and shaking now that the weight of scrutiny had shifted fully onto her shoulders. For the first time, her authority looked hollow, brittle under the gaze of dozens of witnesses. Outside on the tarmac, the night air was sharp and cold. Marcus inhaled deeply, steadying himself. Flashing lights reflected off the silver fuselage, illuminating a stage he never wanted. But the story had already escaped the cabin, carried in the hands of passengers gripping their phones, videos uploading to social media before his feet even touched the ground. The fluorescent lights in the windowless room buzzed faintly, casting a cold glow over the metal table at its center. Marcus Ellison sat upright, shoulders square, hands folded in front of him. He had faced interrogation rooms before in war zones, on bases overseas, but never as the accused. This was supposed to be a homecoming, not a trial. Across from him sat 2 airport security officers and the Skyline Air supervisor who had boarded the plane. The supervisor introduced himself as Daniel Mercer, a man in his early 50s with sharp features and eyes that betrayed fatigue. His voice was controlled, almost too measured. "Mr. Ellison, we're here to gather facts. Ms. Holt claims you were non-compliant and physically intimidating. She alleges you forced her to act for the safety of the cabin." Marcus kept his eyes steady. "That's not what happened. I never touched her. I never raised my voice. I followed instructions. What I did do was return a water bottle to a passenger and secure my bag when turbulence shook it loose. That is all." Mercer leaned back, hands steepled. "Did you say anything to Ms. Holt that could be construed as threatening?" "No, Oak," Marcus said calmly. "I addressed her respectfully every time." Before Mercer could press further, the door swung open. Rosa Martinez entered. Her cheeks flushed from urgency. "I need to speak," she declared. "I was there. I saw everything." Behind her, the Marine passenger followed, phone in hand, the screen still showing the paused video of Karen's hand striking Marcus. Mercer frowned. "This is a secured interview." The Marine cut him off. "And you're about to accuse the wrong man if you don't listen. I've served this country long enough to know when a good man is being railroaded. He didn't deserve what happened on that plane." Rosa set her palms on the table, voice trembling but strong. Karen slapped him. He was calm. He was helping passengers. She misread him. Or maybe she saw something that wasn't there. But it wasn't aggression. Mercer glanced at the officers. Their skepticism wavered, replaced with unease. One of them asked, "Do you have proof?" The Marine pressed play on his phone. Though the footage was shaky, it was clear Marcus sitting still, hands raised slightly in a calming gesture. Karen's hand swung, the slap audible even through the grainy audio. Gasps from surrounding passengers filled the recording. The room went silent. Mercer rubbed his temple, muttering, "This complicates matters." He looked at Marcus. "We're going to need to speak with Ms. Holt again, in another room down the hall." Karen Holt sat hunched, her uniform wrinkled from the hours of turmoil. She clutched a styrofoam cup of coffee she hadn't touched. Her lawyer, hastily appointed by the airline, leaned close, whispering reminders to stay calm. When Mercer entered, followed by an officer, Rosa, and the Marine, Karen's eyes widened. She looked directly at Marcus, who had been escorted into the room behind them. For a brief second, guilt flickered in her expression, but pride quickly smothered it. "Ms. Holt," Mercer began, his voice sharper now, "we've reviewed statements and video evidence from passengers. It appears your account does not align with what occurred." Karen's jaw tightened. "You weren't in that cabin. You don't know the pressure I was under." He moved when he wasn't supposed to. He leaned forward. "I thought he was going to interfere." "You thought," Marcus repeated quietly. The words carried no venom, only weary disbelief. "Your fear turned into my humiliation," Karen's lawyer interjected. "My client acted under stress, believing she was maintaining safety. Any misinterpretation should be considered within that context." The Marine slammed his fist lightly against the table. "She didn't misinterpret. She lost control. She hit a decorated soldier, a CEO. a man who was sitting quietly in his seat. "Don't you dare try to twist this." Karen's eyes darted between them all. "I didn't mean to," she whispered finally, her bravado cracking. "It just happened." Mercer sighed heavily. "Regardless of intent, Miss Holt, the facts are clear. The plane was diverted unnecessarily. Passengers were endangered by the chaos. And Mr. Ellison was assaulted." The officers excused themselves, leaving Mercer with the airline's internal authority to proceed. He pinched the bridge of his nose before speaking. "Mr. Ellison, on behalf of Skyline Air, I want to extend an apology. This is not how we conduct ourselves. You will not face any charges." Relief rippled faintly through Marcus, but it was muted. He looked at Karen, whose face had crumpled into her hands. The weight of her mistake pressed visibly on her shoulders. For a brief moment, he felt the old conflict rise, anger demanding retribution, compassion whispering restraint. "An apology doesn't erase what happened," Marcus said slowly. "You grounded a plane. You tried to brand me as a threat in front of strangers. That kind of accusation follows men like me further than you can imagine." His voice cracked, just slightly, before he steadied it again. "I won't demand vengeance, but I will demand accountability." Mercer nodded gravely. "She is suspended effective immediately pending investigation. Skyline will conduct a full review. You also have the option to pursue legal action independently." Marcus sat back, exhaling through his nose. He wasn't ready to decide. Not here, not now. But the word accountability echoed in his mind. Heavier than justice, larger than punishment. It was about more than him. It was about every man or woman who had ever been silenced, slapped down, or mislabeled because of fear or prejudice. Outside the room, chaos had already begun to brew. Dozens of passengers delayed in Denver, spoke with journalists who had rushed to the terminal after tweets and videos of the incident went viral. Hashtags surged across social media. Dawson grounded in justice. Yao slap soldier. Bao flight 008. In one clip already racking up views, the elderly woman recounted through tears. "He was so kind. He helped me with my bottle, and then she struck him. I couldn't believe my eyes." Another video showed the Marine declaring into a reporter's microphone, "This wasn't just about turbulence. This was about dignity." Marcus stepped out of the interrogation room hours later. Fatigue etched into his face. Cameras clicked instantly, flashes blinding. Reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Ellison, do you plan to sue? Do you feel this was racially motivated? What message do you want to send?" He didn't answer right away. He adjusted his jacket, looked into the cameras, and spoke with the same measured calm he'd carried on the plane. "I'll have more to say in time. But tonight, I want people to remember this. No one deserves to be humiliated for simply existing in their seat. No one deserves to be silenced by false accusations. Dignity belongs to us all." His words traveled faster than any jet. Within minutes, clips of his statements spread online, sparking debates, outrage, and waves of support. Marcus had not sought the spotlight, but the spotlight had found him. The Denver terminal buzzed like a hive when Marcus Ellison finally emerged from the restricted wing. Travelers, reporters, and airport staff all swirled into one chaotic mass. Security officers flanked him, not as captors, but as shields against the onslaught of flashing cameras and microphones. "Mr. Ellison, are you pressing charges?" one reporter shouted above the din. "Do you believe race played a role in what happened?" Another pressed. "Will you sue Skyline Air?" Marcus lifted a hand, not to silence them, but to steady himself. His words from earlier still hung heavy in his chest. Dignity belongs to us all, but he knew the media wanted headlines, not healing. He simply replied, "I'll share more when the time is right." The cameras chased him until he disappeared into a private lounge, provided hastily by Skyline's PR team. Inside, the quiet felt almost suffocating. He sat down, leaned forward, and buried his face in his hands. For the first time since the slap, he let the exhaustion seep through every muscle. He wasn't just tired from the journey. He was tired of carrying the weight of always having to be calm, measured, unshakable in the face of disrespect. Back in the main terminal, Rosa Martinez stood among reporters. Unlike Marcus, she didn't retreat. Her voice trembled, but carried conviction as she told them what she'd seen. He was respectful. He complied with every instruction. What you saw was not aggression, it was dignity. What you saw was a man being punished for being himself. Cameras turned to her, capturing a new voice in the narrative. Meanwhile, Karen Holt was escorted quietly out of the airport through an employee exit. She avoided the cameras, her face hidden behind oversized sunglasses. Yet even in hiding, she could not escape. On social media, her name trended alongside Marcus's. Comments flooded every corner of the internet, some condemning her, others speculating about her motives. For her, the world had become a mirror reflecting one irreversible moment. By midnight, Marcus's phone was overflowing. Hundreds of texts from colleagues, family, and even strangers filled the screen. Some offered support. Others begged for interviews. His assistant from Ellison Global, his tech consulting firm, left voicemails urging him to let their legal team take over. But Marcus ignored them all, instead dialing only one number, his mother's. Her voice answered on the second ring, warm and trembling. "Marcus, baby, I saw it on the news. Are you safe?" He exhaled, the sound carrying both relief and grief. "I'm safe. Mama, I'm coming home." Hours later, Skyline rebooked him on a red-eye flight to Atlanta. This time, he was escorted through security with care, seated in the front row, shielded from gawking eyes. But even in first class, whispers followed him. Passengers glanced, phones in hand, recognizing his face from viral clips. Marcus sat with his journal closed on his lap, staring at the seat back ahead. When the plane landed and he walked through the arrivals hall, his family was waiting. His daughter, Alana, bolted forward, arms flung wide. "Daddy," she cried. Marcus lifted her, holding her so tightly he thought he might never let go. His mother, Evelyn, embraced him next, whispering into his ear, "You held your head high. I'm proud of you." At home that night, Marcus sat at the kitchen table, Alana asleep upstairs, Evelyn brewing tea on the stove. The television played quietly in the background, showing panelists debating the incident. Some called it a tragedy of bias. Others framed it as a corporate scandal. Hashtags scrolled across the screen, Reichs slap soldier, left flight or seat, or stand with Marcus. Evelyn placed a mug in front of him. "The world's looking to you now," she said gently. "What will you do?" Marcus sighed. "I don't want revenge. But this can't just pass like another headline. If I let it fade, the next man in that seat might not have the same witnesses, the same video. He might lose more than his dignity." The following morning, Skyline Air's headquarters in Dallas erupted with crisis meetings. Executives watched the viral videos with pale faces. Public relations warned of boycotts already forming. "We need to act fast." One executive said, "This is bigger than a personnel issue. This is a cultural issue." Within hours, Skyline released a public statement. "We deeply regret the events on Flight 808. The actions taken by our employee do not reflect our values. We are conducting a full investigation, cooperating with authorities, and reviewing training protocols to ensure every passenger is treated with dignity and respect. But the statement only fanned the flames. Critics called it shallow, pointing out that accountability required more than words. Civil rights organizations issued demands for tangible reforms. News anchors replayed Marcus's calm face again and again, contrasting it with Karen's panicked voice calling for the plane to be grounded. By evening, Marcus found himself at the center of a storm he hadn't asked for. His assistant rang again. CNN wants you tonight. So does Good Morning America. And the Times. Everyone wants your story. Marcus hesitated, staring at the phone. He never sought the spotlight, never wanted to be a symbol, yet now he was one, whether he liked it or not. He thought of Alana, of the lesson he wanted to pass down that silence in the face of injustice only feeds it. Set up the interviews, he said finally. His voice was soft, but it carried the weight of decision. If they want to hear, then I'll speak. The next day, Marcus sat under studio lights, his story unfolding for millions. He spoke not with anger, but with clarity. This was never just about me. This is about how fear can become violence, how authority can become abuse when it's unchecked. But it's also about choice. My choice not to retaliate, but to stand still. And our choice, as a society, to decide what we'll tolerate. The segment aired that night, and the response was electric. Hashtags surged anew. Messages flooded in from veterans, CEOs, single parents, students, people who had felt invisible, slapped down, silenced. You spoke for me. One email read, "You reminded me that dignity is power." Marcus closed his laptop at midnight, heart heavy but hopeful. He hadn't chosen this fight. But now he understood perhaps the slap was not the end of his journey, but the beginning of something larger. The morning after Marcus Ellison's first national interview, his inbox was no longer just a collection of support messages from friends and colleagues. It had exploded into something unmanageable. Requests poured in from universities wanting him to speak about leadership, from veteran groups urging him to attend their rallies, from strangers thanking him for giving voice to their own silenced experiences. At breakfast, Alana scrolled through her phone and giggled. "Daddy, you're trending again. Look, our stand with Marcus is everywhere." She tilted the screen toward him, showing videos stitched together by strangers' clips of him catching the water bottle, sitting calm as the slap landed. His quiet words about dignity replayed over stirring music. Evelyn, ever cautious, folded her newspaper and warned, "Public sympathy is powerful. Marcus, but it also shifts quickly. Handle it with grace." Marcus nodded, sipping his coffee. "I didn't choose this spotlight, but maybe it chose me." He didn't say it aloud, but he felt a duty not just to himself, but to every person who had written thank you. "You made me feel seen." Meanwhile, Skyline Air scrambled behind closed doors. Crisis managers presented slides filled with plummeting customer sentiment scores. One executive suggested firing Karen Holt immediately to contain the backlash. But another warned, "If we make her the scapegoat without addressing systemic issues, the outrage will deepen." So the airline pivoted. They announced sweeping reforms, mandatory bias training, new de-escalation protocols for crew, and the establishment of a passenger advocacy council. To the public, it looked like action. But behind the polished press releases, employees whispered that it was survival, not conviction, driving the change. Karen, now suspended without pay, watched the news from her cramped apartment in Denver. Her phone buzzed with relentless notifications, strangers calling her a monster. her face plastered across social media feeds as the symbol of unchecked prejudice. She tossed the phone aside and stared at the ceiling. Her lawyer had advised silence, but silence felt like suffocation. She replayed the slap in her mind again and again, each time hoping it hadn't happened, each time realizing it had. For Marcus, the spotlight only grew harsher. During a televised panel, a commentator suggested, "Isn't this being blown out of proportion? A slap is not a national crisis." Marcus leaned forward, his calm presence filling the screen. "It wasn't just a slap. It was an accusation that I was dangerous. That label follows black men like me every day. On that plane, it could have cost me my freedom. Tomorrow, it could cost someone else their life. That's why it matters." The clip went viral within hours, sparking debates in churches, barbershops, and boardrooms alike. Some dismissed it as sensationalism, but many more nodded in recognition. Across the country, stories surfaced of passengers who had been misjudged or mistreated. The hashtag #BoxGroundedInJustice trended, filled with testimonies from ordinary travelers. Marcus had become more than a victim. He was now a mirror reflecting countless unseen wounds. Yet not all the attention was supportive. Anonymous emails trickled in, calling him a liar, accusing him of exploiting the moment. Trolls doctored photos, painting him as aggressive, trying to rewrite the narrative. His assistant warned him to stay off Twitter, but Marcus refused to hide. "If I can face a slap in front of a plane full of strangers, I can face this," he told Evelyn, though his eyes betrayed the toll it was taking. Late at night, when Alana was asleep, Marcus found himself wrestling with doubt. Was he becoming the very thing he had resisted? Another headline, another talking point. He reread his old journal entries, lines scribbled during deployments. "Hold your ground when the world tries to erase you." The words steadied him. He decided his next step would not be reactive. Instead of more TV panels, he accepted an invitation from a local community center to speak face-to-face with ordinary people. The event was small folding chairs in a church basement, coffee served in styrofoam cups, but it felt real. Marcus told his story without polish, letting the silence between sentences carry as much weight as the words themselves. When he finished, an elderly veteran wheeled himself forward and gripped Marcus's hand. "You reminded us we're not invisible," he said. Marcus felt more moved in that moment than in all the television studios combined. Meanwhile, Karen drifted deeper into isolation. Neighbors avoided her. Old friends stopped returning calls. Her mother, still battling illness, was one of the few voices urging her not to give up completely. "You made a mistake, Karen, a terrible one. But mistakes aren't the end unless you stop trying to make them right." Those words gnawed at her, pulling her between shame and the faintest thread of hope. Back in Atlanta, Marcus gathered with his board at Ellison Global. Investors were nervous, worried that his public fight would damage the company. Marcus listened quietly before responding. "If standing for dignity threatens our brand, then we never had a brand worth keeping." The room fell silent, but slowly, one by one. Heads nodded, days turned into weeks, and Marcus's story continued to ripple. Skyline Air faced class action suits from passengers. Activist groups organized boycotts. Politicians weighed in, some praising Marcus, others dismissing the uproar as overblown. Through it all, Marcus remained steady, refusing to let the narrative spin him into bitterness. One evening, as he tucked Alana into bed, she asked softly, "Daddy, are you a hero now?" He smiled faintly, brushing a curl from her forehead. "No, sweetheart. I'm just someone who didn't stay quiet when it mattered. The polished oak tables in Washington gleamed under the harsh lights of the hearing room. Cameras lined the back wall, broadcasting the proceedings live. Marcus Ellison sat at the witness table, a small nameplate in front of him. Mr. Marcus Ellison, CEO, Ellison Global, U.S., Army veteran. His tie was simple, his posture erect, his face calm but unsmiling. This was not a role he had sought, yet the weight of it pressed upon his shoulders as if destiny had placed him there. The committee chair, a senator from Illinois, leaned into the microphone. Mr. Ellison, thank you for being here. Please tell us, in your own words, what happened on Flight 808. Marcus inhaled slowly, then spoke, his voice steady. I was seated, complying with every instruction. When turbulence shook the cabin, I helped fellow passengers a water bottle returned. A cup caught before it spilled. For those actions, I was accused of being a threat. I was slapped across the face in front of dozens of witnesses. And when I did not retaliate, I was labeled disruptive. And the plane was grounded. The room was silent, save for the clicking of keyboards from journalists live transcribing his testimony. Marcus continued. This wasn't only about one person losing control. It was about a system where bias and fear can escalate into humiliation, and where authority can be abused without accountability. I don't want this to be just about me. I want this to be about ensuring no passenger, no human being is ever treated as disposable. Applause broke out from the public seating area, quickly silenced by the gavel. Senators leaned forward, some nodding, others skeptical. One asked sharply, "Do you believe your race was the deciding factor?" Marcus paused, choosing his words with precision. "I believe perception is shaped by bias, conscious or not. Had I been someone else smaller, whiter, less visibly a black man in his 40s, the story might have ended differently." The clip of that line would dominate headlines within the hour. Meanwhile, Karen Holt watched the broadcast from her apartment, her curtains drawn, dishes piled in the sink. Her lawyer had advised her to avoid all media, but she couldn't resist. Each word Marcus spoke carved deeper into her. She wanted to turn away, to call him a liar, but she couldn't. His calm dignity made her own panic-driven actions feel all the more reckless. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "You need to face this. Karen, running won't heal it." Tears blurred Karen's vision. She remembered her training manuals, the endless lectures on composure, the warnings about bias. She had ignored them, or worse, believed she was above them. Now, her name was synonymous with disgrace. She pulled her blanket tighter and whispered, "I ruined everything. Back in Washington." Rosa Martinez sat behind Marcus, ready to testify next. When called, she walked to the table, adjusting her blazer with shaking hands. Her voice trembled at first but grew steadier as she spoke. "I've flown thousands of hours. I know what it looks like when a passenger is aggressive. Mr. Ellison was not. He was courteous, calm, and helpful. The only aggression that flight saw came from my colleague." Her testimony added weight to Marcus's. The Marine who had recorded the video followed, his booming voice echoing through the chamber. "I serve this country, and I know discipline when I see it. Mr. Ellison showed more discipline sitting in that seat than most people could muster in a lifetime." The hearings lasted hours, but by the end, the narrative was clear. Skyline Air's culture was under fire. Lawmakers demanded reforms. Oversight committees promised investigations. And civil rights leaders praised Marcus for turning personal pain into public accountability. That night, Marcus returned to his hotel exhausted. Evelyn called, her voice filled with pride. You carried yourself with grace, son. Your father would have been proud. Alana chimed in from the background. You looked serious on TV. Daddy, like a superhero. Marcus chuckled softly, but his chest ached with the weight of expectation. He wasn't a superhero. He was just a man trying not to break. Across town, in a different hotel, Skyline executives huddled in a crisis room. Charts of plunging stock prices glowed on screens. If we don't act decisively, we'll bleed out, one VP muttered. Another proposed hiring Marcus as a consultant on cultural reform, a desperate attempt at redemption. The CEO, pale and weary, rubbed her temples. He'll never accept, not after what we allowed. But Marcus wasn't thinking about consulting deals. He was thinking about Karen, despite everything. His mind returned to her face after the slap pail, trembling, almost lost. He remembered her whispered words. I didn't mean to. He wondered what weight she carried now, whether shame had hollowed her as deeply as humiliation had scarred him. A week later, Marcus received an unexpected letter, delivered to his office by courier. No return address, just his name on the envelope. Inside, the handwriting was uneven, shaky. Mr. Ellison, I don't expect forgiveness, and I know I don't deserve it. I see your face on the news and feel the gravity of what I did. I let fear control me. I let pride stop me from admitting it in time. I ruined your dignity and my own. I am sorry. Not the kind of sorry that erases anything, but the kind that keeps me awake at night. Karen Holt Marcus sat in silence, reading the words again and again. He felt no triumph, only heaviness. The slap had started a firestorm, but here was a flicker of something else, remorse. He didn't know yet what to do with it, but he folded the letter carefully and placed it inside his journal. For the first time since the plane was grounded, he allowed himself to wonder if this story could end not only with accountability, but also with the possibility of repair. The community center in Atlanta smelled faintly of coffee and polished wood. Folding chairs circled a plain table, nothing like the grandeur of the Senate hearing halls or the blinding lights of television studios. Marcus Ellison walked in quietly, his tall frame filling the doorway, his expression unreadable. He had agreed to this meeting reluctantly, not for spectacle, but because he believed accountability wasn't complete without facing the person who had wronged him. Karen Holt was already seated, her hands knotted together on her lap. She looked smaller than the woman who once barked orders down an airplane aisle. The weeks of suspension had carved shadows under her eyes. When Marcus entered, she rose slightly, then sat again, unable to find the courage to meet his gaze. A mediator from a local restorative justice program began with calm words. This space is for honesty, not performance. Each of you will have the chance to speak, to listen, and perhaps to leave lighter than you arrived. Marcus nodded once. Karen exhaled shakily. The mediator gestured. Ms. Holt, you may begin. Karen's voice cracked at first, then steadied with effort. Mr. Ellison, Marcus, I don't have the right words. I've replayed that moment 1,000 times. I saw you move, and I told myself it was defiance. But it wasn't. It was kindness. And my fear, my pride, twisted it. I slapped you because I couldn't control myself. And then I lied to cover it. That lie could have ruined your life. I can't take it back. But I need you to know. I am sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. Her hands trembled as she wiped her eyes. Marcus listened without interruption, his arms folded loosely across his chest. When the mediator turned to him, he waited a beat before speaking. I've carried many insults in my life, Marcus said quietly, But this one was public, violent, and it came with an accusation that could have branded me forever. You didn't just slap me. You called me a danger. For men like me, that label can follow us into prisons or graves. I want you to understand the weight of that." Karen's tears fell freely. "I do," she whispered. "I see it now. I see how my fear painted you into a threat you never were. And it shames me." Marcus's voice softened, but the steel remained. "Shame isn't enough. Accountability means change. Not just for you, but for the system that let you carry that bias unchecked. Skyline can retrain all it wants, but until each of us faces the ways we see others, nothing will shift." The mediator let silence stretch, heavy but healing. Then Marcus added, "When I read your letter, I didn't feel vindication. I felt sorrow for you, for me, for what we've become as a society. I don't want your life destroyed. I want your lesson learned." Karen looked up finally, her eyes red but steady. "If there's a way to rebuild, I'll do it. Volunteer work, training, whatever it takes. I don't expect forgiveness, but I'll work for repair." Marcus studied her for a long moment, then gave a single nod. "Then prove it. Not to me, to the people you serve next. Show them the respect you denied me." The mediator closed the session, but the air lingered with something unspoken. Not reconciliation, not absolution, but the fragile beginnings of accountability. When news of the meeting leaked, public reactions were mixed. Some praised Marcus for his compassion. Others criticized him for giving Karen a chance to recover. Editorials debated whether restorative justice had a place in corporate misconduct, but Marcus refused to defend his choice. To him, dignity wasn't about punishing others. It was about refusing to let bitterness take root. Meanwhile, Skyline Air announced sweeping structural reforms. The board approved an independent oversight body with passenger representatives, a first in the airline industry. They pledged to establish a hotline for in-flight discrimination complaints, staffed by advocates outside the company hierarchy. And in a symbolic move, they invited Marcus to keynote their annual leadership conference not as a consultant, but as a voice of accountability. Marcus hesitated before accepting. He knew the optics could be misconstrued, painted as the airline co-opting his story. But Evelyn reminded him, sometimes change needs a face. If they're finally listening, don't turn away. At the conference, Marcus stood before rows of employees in crisp uniforms, executives in tailored suits. His words carried neither fury nor flattery. Your job is not only to deliver passengers safely, it is to see them fully as human beings, not threats, not inconveniences, not stereotypes. On Flight 808, that didn't happen. And it nearly cost more than a diversion. It could have cost trust forever. Don't let it happen again. Karen, attending as part of her reinstatement under strict probation, sat in the back row. She listened with her hands clasped, her heart pounding. She knew redemption would not come from one meeting or one apology, but from 1,000 small acts of humility. Marcus's words struck her not as condemnation, but as a charge to do better. That evening, Marcus returned home, where Alana greeted him with a poster she had drawn in crayons. "Dignity is power." He smiled, lifting her into his arms. For the first time since the slap, he felt a glimmer of peace. The wound hadn't vanished, but it had been transformed into something larger than himself, a movement, a mirror, a reminder. Months passed, and the public storm began to settle. News outlets moved on to other scandals, other headlines, yet for Marcus Ellison, the echoes of that slap lingered, not as an open wound, but as a reminder that dignity had to be defended, nurtured, and shared. His schedule grew busier than ever. Requests poured in for him to speak at universities, veterans organizations, corporate events. At first, he declined most of them. He was a CEO, a father, a man who valued quiet evenings at home with Evelyn and Alana. But he couldn't ignore the steady stream of letters and messages from strangers who saw themselves in his story, people who had been disrespected, silenced, or wrongly accused, and who looked to him as proof that calm resilience could triumph over prejudice. When a major TED-style conference invited him to deliver a keynote on justice and dignity, Marcus wrestled with the decision for days. It's a stage, not a battlefield. Evelyn reminded him one evening as they cleared dinner dishes, but sometimes the right words at the right time can reach further than any boardroom decision. Alana, overhearing, piped up from the living room, "Daddy, tell them to be kind, like you tell me." Her innocent wisdom tilted the scales. Marcus agreed. The auditorium in San Francisco was packed the day of his talk. Cameras from around the world broadcast the event live. As he walked on stage, dressed in a simple navy suit, there was no thunderous introduction, no dramatic music, just a quiet hush that fell over the audience. Marcus paused, looking out at the rows of faces, some skeptical, some eager, all waiting. He began with a story, not statistics. "I was flying home one afternoon. I wore no business suit, no title, just the uniform of my country. And in a moment of turbulence, I reached to help another passenger." What followed was a slap that echoed far louder than the sound it made. It carried with it an accusation that I was a threat, that I was dangerous, that I didn't belong in the very seat I had earned. The audience leaned in. Marcus continued, his voice steady. "What struck me most wasn't the sting of the slap. It was the silence that followed, the hush of passengers unsure whether to speak, the hesitation of authority, the fear that my word would not be enough. And yet, people did speak. They stood. They recorded. They testified. They refused to let a lie stand taller than the truth. That is why I'm here today, not because of a single act of injustice, but because others refused to look away." Applause rippled, soft at first, then stronger. Marcus held up his hand, gently quieting the room. We live in a world where fear can distort perception, where stress can unleash prejudice, where authority can mask cruelty. But we also live in a world where a stranger's courage can tip the balance back toward justice. My story is not just about a slap on an airplane. It is about what happens when we choose dignity over silence. He spoke about leadership, about how true power wasn't the ability to punish, but the responsibility to protect. He described the reforms Skyline Air had begun: bias training, oversight committees, open reporting systems, and he challenged every industry to do the same. Because the next Marcus Ellison could be sitting in row 17 tomorrow, he said, his voice deepening. And the choice you make in that moment could either break him or remind him that he belongs. When he finished, the standing ovation was long and thunderous. Marcus simply bowed his head slightly, humbled rather than triumphant. The conference organizers later called it one of the most impactful talks in their history. Clips of his speech circulated widely, not as viral outrage, but as a rallying call for empathy and respect. Meanwhile, Karen Holt continued her quiet path of accountability. She spent weekends volunteering at a local veterans center, where she helped organize job fairs and wrote resumes for retired service members. The first time she walked through the center's doors, some volunteers whispered, recognizing her from the scandal. But she didn't turn away. She filed papers, made coffee, listened to stories. Over time, Her sincerity chipped away at suspicion. One day, an elderly veteran in a wheelchair told her, "Redemption isn't about saying sorry once. It's about showing up, again and again. You're doing that." Karen wept quietly afterward, not from relief, but from the recognition that she was slowly, painfully rebuilding something she thought was gone forever. Her relationship with her ailing mother deepened too. In the evenings, she would sit by the hospital bed, telling Joanne about her volunteer work. Her mother would squeeze her hand and whisper, "Keep going. Make this count." Those words became her compass. For Marcus, life also found new balance. After months of traveling, he returned to his company, recommitting himself to its mission of empowering communities through technology. He launched a new initiative providing mentorship for young Black entrepreneurs, offering them resources he wished he'd had starting out. Evelyn often teased him, saying he had taken on too much. But she also knew he was driven not by ego, but by a quiet conviction that no one should be made to feel small for existing. One evening, as the family shared dinner on their back porch, Marcus looked at Alana and thought of the future. He didn't want her to inherit a world where dignity was negotiable. He wanted her to grow up believing respect was as natural as breathing. That night, after Alana was tucked into bed, he confessed to Evelyn, "Sometimes I wonder if forgiveness was the right choice. Did I let Karen off too easy?" Evelyn placed her hand over his. "You didn't let her off. You gave her a chance. What she does with it is on her. But you showed the world that strength isn't vengeance. It's vision." Marcus exhaled, letting those words sink in. He realized then that his story wasn't really his anymore. It belonged to everyone who had ever felt unseen, unheard, mislabeled. It belonged to the passengers who had spoken up, to the veterans who rallied behind him, to the young leaders he mentored. It even belonged, in some way, to Karen, whose downfall and recovery reminded the world that prejudice had real costs, but that accountability could plant seeds of change. In time, the scandal of Flight 808 faded from headlines, but its lessons endured. It was retold in classrooms, in training sessions, in living rooms where parents taught their children about respect. For Marcus, the most meaningful moment came a year later, when he attended a community event in Atlanta. A young man approached him shyly, clutching a notebook. "Mr. Ellison," he said, "because of your story, I didn't stay quiet when I saw someone being treated unfairly. I spoke up, and it made a difference." Marcus smiled, a quiet warmth spreading through him. "That's all I could ever hope for," he replied. The night ended with Marcus walking home under the city lights, Evelyn's hand in his, Alana skipping ahead, her laughter ringing like music. The road had been painful, filled with humiliation, struggle, and hard choices. But out of that pain had come a message larger than any slap, larger than any flight that dignity, once defended, could ripple outward, changing not just one life, but countless others. The story of Marcus Ellison is not just about a slap or a diverted flight. It is about what happens when human dignity is denied, and what it takes to restore it. For older generations who have seen cycles of injustice repeat, this story is a reminder that silence can be as damaging as prejudice itself. But it also shows the power of calm courage, choosing to stand tall without lashing out. Even when humiliation cuts deep, we learn that accountability matters, not only in courts or corporations, but in the choices each of us makes daily, whether to judge, to act in anger, or to pause and see the full humanity of another person. For seniors who carry decades of lived experience, This lesson is clear. Our strength is not measured by vengeance, but by vision. What world do we want to leave behind? One where fear decides, or one where respect guides, by holding on to compassion while demanding accountability? Marcus's story gives us a path forward to heal without forgetting, to forgive without excusing, and to believe that even a single act of dignity can ripple outward into lasting change. Thank you so much for watching and for sharing this journey with us. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more stories of resilience, justice, and hope to light. Together, we can keep these voices alive and make sure they reach the people who need to hear them most.